Hello, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. Today we're going to revisit the Tantalus and we're going to talk about a Legends unit, the Reaper. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the Tantalus datasheet. We're going to talk about the pros and the cons of it, and then what roles and uses that datasheet would have in most games of 40k. Then we're going to take a look at the Reaper datasheet and we're going to talk about it a little bit and its pros and cons and its roles and uses. Before we dig in, the one thing I want to say is I do know the Reaper is Legends. We'll address that in just a little bit. So looking at the Tantalus, we see that it moves 16 inches. It's T10 with a 4-up save, 5-up invuln, 18 wounds, 6-up leadership, and it's OC5. It's actually one of the more tough and durable units, which we'll kind of dig into. It does have the Pulse Disintegrators as its gun, which is 12 shots hitting on 3s at 10-2-2. And then it gets Dire Scythe Blades, which is 6 attacks at 8-1-2. And then its special ability is basically the old Shock Prow. When you charge, you pick one enemy unit within engagement range of it. Roll a d6. On a 2 to 3, they take d3 mortals. On a 4 or 5, they take 3 mortals. And on a 6, they take d3 plus 3 mortals. And then it does degrade. If it's got 6 or less wounds left, it's -1 to hit rolls. And it's also a transport. It can carry 16 infantry models. Grotesques take up 3 slots, and then you cannot put anything that flies in it. So no scourges, for example. It does have Deadly Demise D6. It does Deep Strike, and it does have Firing Deck 16. So that's also pretty cool. Let's take a look at the pros. Well, the biggest pro is that obviously it's a transport with a really big capacity. You could put 16 infantry models in it. Obviously, you can only put a handful of grotesques in it. We'll get to that in a minute. But you couple that with the fact that it's firing deck 16, that means one gun from every model gets to shoot, which is really good. You know, you can turn these into a pretty effective gunboat, and they're pretty fun. 16-inch movement, or you can put it in deep strike, means it's really mobile. Deep strike gets a little iffy. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute, but 16-inch movement, it does fly, not that that matters as much anymore. And then the base gun on it is assault, so you can advance and shoot or do deploy teleport homers or, investigate signals, anything like that. And then with 12 shots at strength 10, -2 damage, it is one of the stronger not Dark Lance profiles guns that we have. Obviously, Heat Lances are pretty strong as well, but this is a pretty solid gun for our army. I will say, Cabalites are really good inside of them. Put 3 heavy weapons teams, which would mean 3 Dark Lances, 3 blasters, 3 splinter cannons, 3 shredders, and either 3 splinter rifles or 3 blast pistols or whatever it is you put on the sergeant. It doesn't matter. But the big thing you're getting out of it is 3 Dark Lances, 3 blasters, 3 splinter cannons, and 3 shredders. So you really get a lot of condensed shooting because the Dark Lances are going to be obviously strength 12, -3, d6 plus 2 damage. And because it's all on the Tantalus profile, when you spend that pain token, you get to reroll all those hit rolls. So you just make all of your cab lights, I don't want to say more efficient, because that's not necessarily the right word, but they're more efficient when it comes to spending your pain tokens because you're getting 3 different Dark Lances with 1 pain token. So it's pain token efficiency, yes. Points efficiency, probably not so much, but that's not why we run this. It's actually just a lot of fun. I personally also like 15 racks inside of it for a few reasons. You don't have to, it's not as big of a points investment with the racks. You get an interesting array of weapons. 3 liquefiers means you're going to get 3d6 shots that auto hit. They're strength 4 -1. So it's going to be really good at just making sure you're clearing out, like a unit of guardsmen or some other bigger squad of infantry. Maybe your opponent's got witches or harlequins on the table, anything like that. The 3 ossifactors, they are a single shot, but they're dev wounds for 2 damage and they're anti-infantry 4+. They're not crazy good, but the dev wounds is nice just because if you happen to get that 6 to wound, you're just putting the 2 damage on whatever you're shooting at anyway. They'll just kill a marine. Everyone that goes through is just one dead Space Marine. So it's also a good flexible gun in that regard. And then the 3 hex rifles, and this is really where I think they can get a little silly, is now you have 3 shots that are 3 damage each, and they're precision, and you get to re-roll those hit rolls, and they're I think it's strength 6 -2. So it's one of those where, if your opponent's got some important characters, like a Necron list, they're gonna work to keep those characters a bit more hidden if they know you're just gonna be throwing a bunch of 3 damage sniper shots down. And that gets a little interesting once you kind of factor in how much it could dictate the flow of the game. Overall, I think the Tantalus is pretty cheap and it's much more durable than a lot of our army. It is T10, and I don't remember if it's the highest toughness in the army, but it's real close to it if it's not. It does have the 5-up invuln instead of the standard 6-up invuln we see on a lot of our boats. The fact that it's really big is both a hindrance and a bonus. Its size means that most of the time you're probably going to have cover with it just because you're not going to be able to put it out in the open very easily. So it's going to be a 4-up save with cover against most shooting attacks, and then a 5-up invuln. It is 18 wounds. A lot of things aren't going to be able to just charge into it and one-shot it. There are some armies that will shoot it off the board in a single shooting phase, so you still need to be careful with how you use it. And it's 280 points, which is really, it's cheaper or about the same price as 3 Raiders, but it brings a little bit more to the table than the 3 Raiders do because its gun is better, its toughness is better, its invuln is better. It doesn't have the transport capacity, but its melee's also better and its movement's higher. So it's one of those like it just brings a little bit more to the table. And I think the only thing you really lose out on when you take this instead of 3 Raiders is 3 Raiders is 3 units that you can spread out, whereas this is just one really big unit. Its scything charge ability is pretty good. We talked about it, just being able to do the shock prow all the time, getting mortals in just for charging. I rank this actually pretty high in my tier list. If you didn't see my tier list video, I'll put a card in here and you can just click the link or I'll do a link in the description. One or the other. We'll make sure you guys get access to the tier list video. I ranked it pretty high, not because I think it's game breaking, but I think you're going to catch people off guard with it. And it's durable enough that you're going to be able to do a lot of damage with it as long as you position it well. Again, just like most of our army, you cannot put it somewhere in the open and expect it to live. But because you can hide it, it doesn't have the you don't benefit from obscuring like it did last edition. So because you can hide it and because you can strike and fade it, like you can get it out there, shoot, spend the CP to move it again. There's a lot of things that you can do with it. Now that doesn't mean it's not without its cons. I will say that it's expensive as hell to load this thing up with Cabalites. Cabalites are 110 points for a 10-man, and it's 80 points for a Venom. So if you want to put those 3 special weapons, heavy weapons teams into it, it's an extra 570 points because you need the 330 for the 3 units of Cabalites, and then you need the 240 to bring the 3 Venoms. So you're looking at, almost 900 points to be able to do this one thing. So it's one of those where it doesn't necessarily give you a lot to play with once you've dedicated to playing it this way. It's still good on its own, and it's not worth the 570 points. It's still a pretty viable list from a competitive standpoint as long as you understand how to use your models. And that's really where most of our army is I know that we're considered the bottom of the bottom tier right now, but I can tell you from experience, like if you know how to position your units, you're going to be able to win more than you lose. The biggest issue I see with us is that our bad matchups are just so bad that we can barely interact into them. It is a massive model, which means it can be hard to position or maneuver due to its large size and footprint. Fly, like I said, is much less important in 10th edition than it was in 9th. So it having fly honestly doesn't really do much for it given its massive size. It's one of those where There's not a lot of places you're going to be able to just put it, even less than you could before because of the nerfs to the fly keyword. But that being said, if you have one and you haven't put it on the table, I still think you're doing yourself a disservice. Get that silly thing on the table and have some fun. The other downside is that Grotesque taking up 3 slots per model means you can only take 5, because 5 times 3 is 15, and it has a 16 transport capacity. But what that really means is that you can only put 3 Grotesques into it, because you only get units of 3 or 6. You can't take units of 5. You're just kind of wasting the slots if you're putting 3 Grotesques into it, because they don't do anything in it. They're not as fragile as, say, a unit of witches, which could benefit from the extra mobility and the extra durability that the Tantalus has. They don't really have any shooting the way the Kabalites do, to where you really benefit from taking those pain tokens, because their liquefiers just auto hit. There's not really a point to taking Grotesques and putting them in the Tantalus anymore. And that to me is a con, because that was one of the cooler things about Ninth Edition, was being able to throw Grotesques in it, slam it into somebody. If they kill it, the Grotesques get out, and then you just get to deal with that. So really, you're just very limited in what you can put in it, and even some of the things you might want to put in it aren't really worth it. You could put Drazar and friends in it, and that's not necessarily a bad plan, because you're just giving them a big wound soak, and you could charge the Tantalus into things, and it's much less likely to get wrapped, and it's much less likely to die, which would allow on your next turn for the Incubi to disembark and fight. But again, the downside to that is going to be you're not taking advantage of its firing deck. It does have very limited strat support also. For the most part, I think there's only like 2 strats, and that's the fire and fade strat, and then the lightning fast reactions LFR. So it's the -1 to hit. So we're talking about 2 strats that you can really use on it, because it doesn't have the Kabalite keyword, it doesn't have the Witch keyword, and to me this is one of the biggest issues our army has, is so many things that had the option of taking different keywords just don't have it anymore. And that's another thing that kind of holds us back. Because if the Tantalus had the option of either taking the Witch keyword or the Kabalite keyword, you could now give it a better role. Not that it doesn't have one, but you could more clearly define it. Because if you give it the Witch keyword, now you can advance and charge with it, which means you can advance, shoot, and charge, and you can load it with witches, and now it has a much more clearly defined role with a shock assault type style play. If you give it the Kabalite keyword, you can use the reroll wound roll strat on things that are under half strength, and it just makes it a bit more efficient as a shooting platform. Going into its roles and uses, it is already a pretty efficient shooting platform, and I'm not speaking from a points perspective. I am speaking from a pain token damage output perspective. With a lot of options, Kabalites, racks, you can kind of gear it up to do a few different things, and then getting all those rerolls with one pain token is pretty good. It does have solid melee and mobility, so you can tag softer targets on backfield objectives and don't necessarily have to worry about it getting annihilated. I will say it's not exceptionally resilient. Again, it's just more resilient than a lot of our army. So expect it to be dead. Don't expect it to live through a game. Even the games I've played in 10th, I think it's died within the first 3-ish turns. But I tend to play a kind of aggressive play style where I'm putting some of those things up front, and maybe that's not where it needs to be. There's probably people out there who have used fire and fade with it and just bounced it around the back of the board, had good success keeping it alive by using it in that way. I will say it's a lot of fun, and it does have competitive potential. I think most games I would start with it on the board. There's a few matchups where I probably wouldn't, and that's maybe like a more elite army like Knights, where I don't necessarily have to worry about them being able to spread out and screen it from being able to come in. Or maybe like a Custodes matchup, again, where I don't necessarily have to worry about them coming in and screening me out completely. But like a Orc army where they can spread out and they don't go away very quickly. I will say that's going to be one where it's just starting on the board, because I don't want to mess with having to put that massive unit on the table and then getting screened out. Before we dig into the Reaper, I do want to say I do know its legends. Like I said, I had a subscriber ask my thoughts on it, and I want to make sure that we do take a look at it, because I had somebody on the the tier list said, hey, where would you rank Reapers? And I was like, well, it's Legends, which is why it's not on the video, but I'll make sure I touch on it on another video. So I wanted to make sure we talked about it and, give that subscriber my thoughts on it. I will say that there are a handful of tournaments that do allow Legends. So this could be relevant if you are one of those communities that has those. And then, obviously if you are more of like a Crusade player, a narrative player, then this portion of the video is a bit more for you anyway. So let's look at the data sheet. It does move 14 inches. It is T9 with a 4-up save, 6-up invuln, 11 wounds. If you look at this data sheet, you will see that it is basically a copy-paste of the Ravager. It's got Deadly Demise, D3, Deep Strike, Power from Pain, Eradicate the Foe. The ability's the exact same. The only thing that's different really here is the guns. Even the keywords are the same outside of replacing Ravager with Reaper. Its pros, again, very similar stat line to the Ravager, so those are its pros. It's T9 with 11 wounds. Rerolling ones against units that are at their starting strength is pretty good, especially given the different profiles on the guns. 95 points is pretty cheap for the chassis. It is the same price as the Ravager was before it got smacked with the Yanari tax. And the gun's actually pretty good. It's 3 shots, but it's effectively a Dark Lance profile. It's strength 12, -3. The only difference is you don't get the +2 damage. It's just a flat D6. But that's important because instead of 3 Dark Lances, you get 1 of this gun, but it still gives you 3 shots. Where this is, to me, a little bit better than the Reaper is that you also have the Blast profile, which to me makes it a lot more versatile. Like, yes, the damage output for the Ravager is better because the Dark Lances just have an inherent +2 bonus to their damage. But getting D6 +3 shots with Blast at strength 6, -1, 1 damage, and then you reroll ones against units at its starting strength or just reroll hits if you're, going to spend the pain token on it. Gets interesting because if you're playing against these hordier armies like these Orc Boys or these, the Gaunt spams that, some tournaments are seeing, if you run into somebody who's got 20 models in their unit and they haven't lost any, 20 divided by 5 is 4. So you're getting a D6 +3 +4. So a D6 +7 shots, which means you're getting 8 to 13 shots. And that's really good. Especially because, again, if we're looking at Gaunt spam, if you're going to hit on 3s, re-rolling 1s, or just hit on 3s, re-rolling, because you might want to spend that pain token. And you're going to wound on 2s, into Gaunt specifically, because they're strength 6, T3. Having the anti-horde option, to me, makes it a better take than the Ravager, even though the Ravager's Dark Lances do more damage, just because you're adding a versatility that the Ravager just doesn't have. You can't take 1 Dark Lance and 2 of the Disintegrators anymore. It's either Dark Lances or Disintegrators, if I remember right. The Proud Blade melee profile is awesome. My only gripe about it is that it's a single attack, but it does have extra attacks. But it's strength 8, -2, 2 damage, and it has lance and sustained hits 3. So on the charge, you'll get a single attack that will hit on 4s, strength 8 +1 to wound with sustained hits 3. So if you get a 6, you actually get 4 hits with lance. I really wish this is how they would have done the shock prow chain snare upgrades that we used to have on our boats. And really, there's almost no reason for it to not be there. Other than, for whatever reason, GW decided we should not have good melee on our boats anymore. I guess they got tired of players slamming them into things and giggling, like, ha, 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 look at what I've got. I will say, the Reaper, because of the keywords it has, it does have pretty solid strat support. The biggest con is obviously that it's Legends, so it's really hard justifying putting it on the table. If you're not a big competitive player, this is probably worth your time, worth your money, worth your investment to put one on the table. Because even though it's Legends, obviously the more narrative players can still use their Legends items. That's why Legends exists. It is still pretty fragile. Most of our army is pretty fragile. So there's always that. But man, honestly, looking at this data sheet, it's hard to find any faults in it. It's really good. It's very versatile. And I think if it weren't Legends, if this data sheet wasn't Legends and it was just copy pasted into our index, this thing would get a ton of play. And it probably would have gotten the same Craft World adjacent nerf that the Ravager got, right? Because I could take it in Ynnari, we've got to, instead of make it cost more points for Ynnari players, we got to just make it cost more points for everybody. If it wasn't Legends, this thing would be on the table a lot. I do feel strongly about that. I think that is an accurate statement. This is effectively a copy paste of the Ravager with a small tweak on guns. It fills pretty much the exact same role. Its melee profile is cheeky and fun, but it doesn't really open it up to be a consistent charger or melee damage dealer. It just fills the same role as the Ravager with a bit more versatility and slightly less damage output. Very, very good unit. I may have to just let my buddies know I'm going to put one on the table and we're just going to have some silly fun games with some Legends units just so we can kind of test them out. It seems funny and I do like it. That's going to wrap us up. Let's give a shout out to our hatchlings, the real Donnie G. Appreciate your support, man. I know you'd been immortal for a long time, but I appreciate that you're still giving the support. We've got one Phoenix, Jamie. Big shout out to her. Thank you for your support. And then our immortals, Lord Wellingstone, Danny Boy or Daniel Bodecker, and Captain Too Tall. Again, big thanks to everybody, especially our immortals and our new patrons. All the support does help fund events so that we can continue to make sure we have venues and terrain and things of that nature. So once again, big thanks. I appreciate it. If you're still with me, thanks for watching. There's a couple of announcements here. If you look at the screen, you're going to see the Patreon link, you're going to see the Teespring link, you're going to see the Twitch link, but there's a new one up there. That's for the web store. It is still growing. I'm still adding things to it, but it is all going to be Games Workshop and adjacent products, as well as we will be adding some toys and hobby stuff like models, like actual models, tanks, and stuff like that. So, feel free, check it out. If there's something you'd like to see, let me know. I can't promise that I'll put it in there, but I will definitely investigate it. And, I appreciate the support that everybody has given us. The web store it is open now. It will only ship to the US for now. And then we will be reopening the physical store in January. So what I will say is most of our web store stuff is only going to be about 10% off retail for GW products. And that is because I will also be running the same pricing at the local level. All patrons that are $5 and up will get a 10% off discount code that is unique to them for the web store, and that will stack with the already reduced price at the web store. Not everything will be reduced price. You'll click on there and you'll see like paints are at retail, but your Patreon discount code will apply to the paints, and it'll apply to the sale price that's already on the web store. So those will stack. So things that are already 10% off, you're just going to get 20% off is how it's going to shake out. And then there's free shipping on orders 65 and over. And it's just flat rate shipping for everything else. So as I grow and I adjust, a lot of this may change. But just so everybody's aware of where we're at and what we're doing. And if you choose to buy from the web store, you're not just buying from a faceless entity who's just a cold warehouse who's just stocking things. Like, we have a local storefront, we run events, we support the community. So if you don't have a local store that you could support, the best way to support a local store would be checking out our web store and helping us out. Thank you.